Hi everyone. Welcome to the module on definitions and key components of a multi-hazard early warning system. This module is separated into two sessions, an introduction to the basic concepts and terminologies of disaster and climate resilience. And the second session, introduction to multi-hazard early warning system and its key components. By the end of the module, you will understand the key terminologies and concepts in disaster and climate resilience and multi-hazard early warning systems. By understanding these terms and concepts, we can better explain the importance of MHEWS in protecting lives, reducing damage to property, and minimizing economic losses. A well-functioning MHEWS integrates risk knowledge, monitoring, forecasting, and warning dissemination, ensuring that the right information reaches the right people at the right time. Let's get started. Let's look at this picture. Do you think this earthquake is a disaster? If this earthquake occurred in a remote area with no infrastructure and no people suffered from it, it is not a disaster. It is important to know that earthquakes do not kill. It is the vulnerable structures that take lives and livelihoods in an event of an earthquake. So, let's start with the basic definitions. Natural hazards are severe and extreme weather and climate events occurring naturally in the world. Natural hazards become disasters when people's lives and livelihoods are destroyed. Given that we cannot prevent natural hazards, it is essential to focus on preventing the loss of lives and livelihoods when they occur. The term natural disaster incorrectly implies that the disaster itself is caused solely by nature, overlooking the human and social factors that contribute to the disaster's impact. And using the term natural disaster can promote a sense of fatalism, suggesting that nothing can be done to prevent or reduce the impact of these events. That's why we are moving away from calling them natural disaster and instead using disaster, hazard, or more specific terms like earthquake disaster, flood disaster, or climate-induced disaster. To understand disaster risk, we need to look at three key components: hazard, vulnerability, and exposure. Hazard refers to a dangerous phenomenon, such as an earthquake, flood, cyclone, or drought, which has the potential to cause harm. Vulnerability represents the susceptibility of individuals, communities, and systems to the impact of hazards. It includes various factors such as physical, social, economic, and environmental conditions and the coping and adaptive capacities of those affected. Exposure involves the presence of people, structures, agricultural areas, businesses, and assets in locations that could be adversely affected by a hazard. When a hazard interacts with vulnerable and exposed elements, disaster risk emerges. This diagram illustrates how these components overlap and interact to form the overall disaster risk. By understanding these concepts, we can better assess risks and implement strategies to reduce vulnerability, limit exposure, and ultimately minimize the impact of hazards. We can also say disaster risk is the potential loss of life, injury, or destroyed or damaged assets that could occur to a system, society, or community in a specific period of time, determined probabilistically as a function of hazard, exposure, vulnerability, and capacity. And here is the function of disaster risk. The additional element is capacity. Capacity is sometimes described as the opposite of vulnerability, but this overlooks the fact that even poor and vulnerable people have capacities. Indeed, the starting point for capacity development is the existing knowledge, strengths, attributes, and resources individuals, organizations, or society has. So, disaster risk can be seen as a function where higher hazards, exposure, and vulnerability increase the risk, while greater capacity reduces it. In the next few slides, we will look at the detail of each component of disaster risk. A hazard is defined as any process, phenomenon, or human activity that may cause loss of life, injury, or other health impacts, as well as property damage, social and economic disruption, or environmental degradation. Hazards can be categorized into three types. Natural hazards are primarily associated with natural processes and phenomena, such as earthquakes, floods, or hurricanes. Anthropogenic hazards or human-induced hazards are primarily caused by human activities and decisions, such as industrial accidents or pollution. Socio-natural hazards are a combination of natural and human factors. For example, environmental degradation or climate change can exacerbate natural hazards, creating more complex scenarios. We will look in more detail of the different types of hazards in the next session. Exposure refers to the presence of people, property, infrastructure, systems, or other elements in areas that could be adversely affected by hazards. These elements are located in hazard zones and are subject to potential losses when a hazard occurs. For instance, a city built on a floodplain, like the one shown in the image, is exposed to the risk of flooding. Vulnerability refers to the conditions determined by physical, social, economic, and environmental factors or processes that increase the susceptibility of individuals, communities, assets, or systems to the impacts of hazards. Social vulnerability refers to the negative impacts on communities from external stresses, such as natural disasters or human-induced changes. Factors like age, income, and education can increase susceptibility to harm. For example, low-income communities often have less access to healthcare. Economic vulnerability refers to the susceptibility of an economy, whether at the individual, community, or national level, to damage and loss during a disaster. It depends on the economy's ability to absorb shocks and recover. For example, a coastal community reliant on tourism is more impacted by a typhoon. Physical vulnerability refers to the potential for damage to buildings, infrastructure, and natural environments from a hazard. It depends on factors like hazard intensity, construction quality, and mitigation measures. For example, a city in a seismic zone with poorly constructed buildings and infrastructure is more likely to experience severe damage, loss of life, and costly recovery during an earthquake. Environmental vulnerability is the susceptibility of natural environments to damage from natural or man-made disasters, causing ecosystem disruption, biodiversity loss, and resource degradation. For example, a forest is vulnerable to wildfires, which can destroy flora and fauna, degrade soil, and increase erosion and landslide risks. Capacity is sometimes described as the opposite of vulnerability, but this overlooks the fact that even poor and vulnerable people have capacities. Indeed, the starting point for capacity development is the existing knowledge, strengths, attributes, and resources individuals, organizations, or society has. There are also 4 types of capacity. Social capacity, such as education, enhances preparedness by raising awareness of disaster risks and impacts. For economic capacity, insurance is a great example. Or government funding to respond to disaster is another good example. Physical capacity includes buildings designed to withstand earthquakes using proper codes, and infrastructure systems like water, electricity, and transportation that are built to endure disasters and maintain or quickly restore services. Environmental capacity includes a diverse forest that can better withstand wildfires or pests, wetlands that absorb floodwaters, and mangroves or coral reefs that mitigate storm surges and tsunamis. Now we have understood disaster risk, let's go to the topics of disaster management. Disaster risk management is the application of disaster risk reduction policies and strategies to prevent new disaster risk, reduce existing disaster risk, and manage residual risk, contributing to the strengthening of resilience and reduction of disaster losses. And you might have already heard about the disaster management cycle. The disaster risk management cycle is a continuous process that aims to reduce the impact of disasters and improve response and recovery efforts. It consists of 4 key phases. Prevention and mitigation. This phase focuses on actions that prevent or reduce the potential impact of disasters, such as strengthening building codes, enforcing land use planning, and promoting sustainable environmental practices. Preparedness. Preparedness involves planning and preparing for disasters before they occur. This includes developing emergency plans, conducting training and drills, and establishing early warning systems to ensure effective response when a disaster strikes. Response. The response phase occurs immediately after a disaster and involves providing emergency assistance, such as search and rescue operations, medical care, and temporary shelter to minimize the adverse effects on people and property. Recovery and reconstruction. This phase focuses on restoring affected communities to their pre-disaster state or better. It includes rebuilding infrastructure, providing financial and psychological support to affected individuals, and implementing strategies to reduce future risks. The cycle illustrates that disaster risk management is a dynamic process, with each phase feeding into the next to build resilience and reduce vulnerability over time. The pre-disaster phase consists of two critical components: mitigation and preparedness. These actions aim to reduce the risk and potential impact of disasters before they occur. Mitigation: this involves both structural and non-structural measures designed to minimize the risk of disasters over the long term. Structural measures include building dams, levees, or earthquake-resistant infrastructure, while non-structural measures involve policies like land use planning, public education, and enforcing building codes to prevent or reduce damage. Preparedness focuses on activities and measures taken in advance to ensure an effective response when a disaster occurs. This includes developing emergency response plans, conducting training and drills, establishing communication systems, and creating early warning systems to alert communities about impending threats. Together, mitigation and preparedness build resilience and ensure that communities are better equipped to handle disasters, minimizing loss of life, property, and disruption. The post-disaster phase consists of two main components: response and recovery and reconstruction. These steps are crucial for managing the immediate impacts of a disaster and for rebuilding communities in the aftermath. Response: this involves actions taken immediately before, during, or right after a disaster strikes. The primary goal is to save lives, reduce health impacts, and meet the basic needs of affected populations. Response activities include search and rescue operations, providing emergency medical care, distributing food and water, and setting up temporary shelters. Recovery and reconstruction: this phase focuses on restoring and rebuilding the vital infrastructure, systems, and services that are essential for the functioning of communities. It includes repairing and rebuilding homes, schools, hospitals, and roads, as well as restoring livelihoods and social services. The objective is not just to return to normalcy but to rebuild in a way that reduces future risks and enhances resilience. By effectively managing the response and recovery phases, communities can recover more quickly and emerge stronger, reducing the impact of future disasters. Now, let's look at what is disaster risk reduction. Disaster risk reduction is aimed at preventing new and reducing existing disaster risk and managing residual risk, all of which contribute to strengthening resilience and therefore to the achievement of sustainable development. Disasters, such as earthquakes, floods, tsunamis, and storms, pose significant risks. DRR aims to mitigate these risks by implementing a combination of proactive measures, policies and strategies, developing frameworks and guidelines that promote safety, resilience, and preparedness at all levels of government and society. Plans and programs, creating detailed plans and specific programs to address identified risks, enhance preparedness, and build response capabilities. Community-based DRR, engaging local communities in disaster risk reduction activities, as they are often the first responders and have a deep understanding of local risks and vulnerabilities. Public-private partnerships, collaborating between governments, businesses, and civil society to pool resources, knowledge, and expertise for more comprehensive risk reduction. By integrating these components, DRR aims to build safer, more resilient communities, ensuring that when disasters occur, their impacts are significantly reduced. DRR focuses on minimizing the impact of disasters by addressing the factors that contribute to risk. The aim is to increase capacity and reduce vulnerability, which will lead to less damages and losses. By building the capacity of communities, governments, and institutions, we enhance their ability to prepare for, respond to, and recover from disasters. This includes improving skills, resources, infrastructure, and systems to effectively manage risks. At the same time, strengthening capacity directly reduces vulnerability. Vulnerability is decreased when communities are better prepared, have stronger infrastructure, and are more informed about the risks they face. The goal of DRR is to create resilient communities that can withstand and recover quickly from disasters, ultimately leading to safer, more sustainable environments. Another commonly key concept is disaster resilience. Disaster resilience is the ability of individuals, communities, organizations, or countries to anticipate, prepare for, respond to, and recover from disasters while minimizing the impact on lives, property, and well-being. Resilience involves not just bouncing back to the pre-disaster state but also bouncing forward, improving systems, infrastructure, and social networks to better withstand future hazards. This means developing capacities to absorb shocks, adapt to changing conditions, and rapidly recover from disruptions. Here, we can see the relationship between disaster risk reduction and disaster management within the broader framework of disaster risk management. DRR is an ongoing, everyday process focused on reducing the risks associated with potential disasters, while DM deals with the actions taken during and after a disaster event. Both DRR and DM are critical components of disaster risk management, working together to achieve sustainable development. DRR reduces the likelihood and impact of disasters, while DM ensures effective response and recovery when disasters occur. Together, they help protect development gains and ensure a safer, more resilient future. Climate change and environmental degradation are major challenges that impact development, economy, and humanitarian efforts. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports that climate change is altering disaster risk by increasing the frequency, intensity, and duration of extreme weather events, as well as rising sea levels and temperatures. Climate change also heightens societal vulnerabilities, affecting water availability, agriculture, and ecosystems, which may slow economic growth, reduce food security, and exacerbate poverty, especially in developing countries. For over a decade, experts have advocated integrating DRR and climate change adaptation, or CCA, to build resilience. Both DRR and CCA address overlapping challenges, such as climate-related disasters like floods, droughts, and cyclones. Climate change is predicted to increase the frequency and severity of these hazards, putting already vulnerable populations at greater risk. Long-term changes, such as unpredictable rainfall and sea level rise, can also affect livelihoods and health, making communities more susceptible to future shocks and changes. Another important concept to know is anticipatory action. Anticipatory action refers to actions taken to reduce the impacts of a forecast hazard before it occurs, or before its most acute impacts are felt. The actions are carried out in anticipation of a hazard's predicted impacts and based on a forecast of when, where, and how the event will unfold. Anticipatory action allows more effective delivery. The FAO calculates that every dollar they invest in anticipatory action could give families $7 in benefits and avoid losses. Some examples of anticipatory action include evacuation of local communities before a typhoon and distribution of supply before a storm hits. And a critical component of DRM is an effective early warning system. That is an integrated system of hazard monitoring, forecasting and prediction, disaster risk assessment, communication and preparedness activities, systems and processes that enables individuals, communities, governments, businesses, and others to take timely action to reduce disaster risks in advance of hazardous events. In later modules and sessions, we will discuss the details of the key components of an early warning system. We have covered some of the basic concepts and terminology of disaster and climate resilience. Now, let's go to the basic concept and terminologies of a multi-hazard early warning system. We will start with the different types of hazards that can be addressed using multi-hazard early warning systems. These hazards are categorized into 5 main types. Hydrometeorological hazards. These include weather-related events like typhoons, hurricanes, floods, droughts, heat waves, and cold spells. MHEWS help predict these events and provide timely warnings to minimize impacts. Biological hazards. These involve threats from bacteria, viruses, or parasites, as well as venomous wildlife, insects, and poisonous plants. Examples include disease outbreaks, mosquito-borne illnesses, and other health risks. Environmental hazards. These hazards arise from changes or degradation in the environment, such as soil degradation, deforestation, loss of biodiversity, and sea level rise. MHEWS can monitor environmental changes and help communities adapt to these risks. Geological or geophysical hazards. These include natural events like earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, landslides, rockslides, and surface collapses. MHEWS can provide advance alerts for certain geological hazards, helping people to evacuate or take preventive actions. Technological hazards. These are human-made risks, such as industrial pollution, nuclear radiation, toxic waste, dam failures, transport accidents, factory explosions, fires, and chemical spills. MHEWS can play a crucial role in identifying and managing technological hazards. By understanding these various types of hazards, we can better appreciate the importance of MHEWS in providing timely warnings and protecting lives, property, and the environment. And to understand the potential level of harm caused by a hazard, we have to look at the following characteristics. Magnitude of the hazard. This is the size or scale of a hazard event, such as the strength of an earthquake or the amount of rainfall during a flood, significantly influences the potential damage it can cause. Frequency of hazard or recurrence. Sometimes, we call it the return period. This refers to how often a hazard occurs. Hazards with a high frequency may lead to increased cumulative impacts over time, while those with a low frequency but high severity can cause significant damage in a single event. Intensity at the impact point is the level of force or energy exerted by the hazard at the point of impact affects the extent of damage. For example, the wind speed of a cyclone or the lava flow rate of a volcanic eruption will dictate the intensity of destruction in affected areas. Duration is the length of time a hazard event lasts can also determine its level of harm. Longer durations, such as prolonged droughts or extended heat waves, often result in more severe impacts compared to shorter, more intense events. An early warning system, or EWS, is a critical tool that provides timely and meaningful information to at-risk communities. It allows people to take protective actions to minimize damage and save lives. The system comprises several components: understanding the risk, monitoring and forecasting, effective communication and dissemination, and ensuring communities have the capacity to respond. A multi-hazard early warning system, or MHEWS, is an integrated system that provides timely and effective information to communities and individuals who face various hazards. This information comes through identified institutions and helps people take timely actions to reduce disaster risks. The core purpose of MHEWS is to protect lives, livelihoods, and property by offering advance warnings for different types of hazards, whether natural or human-made. We'll delve into what makes these systems work and why they are so vital. Why are multi-hazard early warning systems so important? First, early warning systems enable early action, which saves lives and reduces economic losses. They also integrate warnings for different types of hazards, which makes preparedness and response efforts more cohesive. Additionally, they support risk-informed decision-making, which is critical for effective preparedness and response. According to the United Nations, an effective early warning is capable of saving many lives and reducing damage by 30% if activated 24 hours before the event. We need to understand the difference between alerting, warning, and MHEWS. Alerting involves notifying people about a potential hazard or event. It is a basic step in communicating a risk but needs to include detailed information or instructions on what actions to take. For example, an alert may inform people of an approaching storm but may need to provide specific guidance on how to prepare or respond. A warning is a more comprehensive communication that informs about a hazard and provides instructions on actions to protect life and property. However, a warning alone is not an entire early warning system. MHEWS involves much more than just issuing warnings. MHEWS is a coordinated and comprehensive approach encompassing risk knowledge, monitoring, forecasting, communication, and the ability to respond. It integrates multiple types of hazards and ensures that all elements work together to provide timely, actionable information to at-risk populations. MHEWS is designed to cover a broader range of hazards and ensure a more effective response than alerts or warnings alone. The 4 key elements of MHEWS. Disaster risk knowledge based on the systematic collection of data and disaster risk assessments. Detection, monitoring, analysis, and forecasting of the hazards and possible consequences. Dissemination and communication, by an official source, of authoritative, timely, accurate, and actionable warnings and associated information on the likelihood and impact. Preparedness at all levels to respond to the warnings received. Under the Early Warning System for All initiative of the United Nations, UN agencies and international organizations are leading the efforts in each of the key elements. Disaster risk knowledge and management is led by UNDRR. Detection, observation, monitoring, analysis, and forecasting is led by WMO. Warning dissemination and communication is led by ITU. Preparedness and response capabilities is led by IFRC. The first component, risk knowledge, involves understanding the risk landscape by identifying hazards, assessing vulnerabilities, and analyzing exposure. This component helps us determine who or what is at risk and to what extent. Tools like risk maps and data collection methods are crucial for this process. Accurate and up-to-date risk knowledge forms the foundation of an effective early warning system. The second component, monitoring and warning services, focuses on the continuous observation of hazard indicators, such as weather patterns, seismic activity, or flood levels. This involves developing accurate prediction models and real-time data collection and analysis. The goal here is to ensure that warnings are accurate and timely, allowing communities to take early actions to protect themselves. The third component, dissemination and communication, is about ensuring that warnings reach everyone who needs them. This involves using multiple communication channels, such as SMS, radio, TV, and social media, to make sure the message is clear, accurate, and accessible. It's also about developing networks within communities to ensure that even the most vulnerable groups are reached and understand the message. The fourth component is response capability. This component ensures that communities know how to respond when a warning is issued. It involves community preparedness programs, training for responders and community members, and the development of contingency plans, such as evacuation routes. Building this capability requires education, practice, and engagement at all levels to ensure that everyone knows what to do when a warning is issued. To ensure the success of a multi-hazard early warning system, there are several key technical and social institutional factors to consider. Starting with the technical factors. Predictability. This refers to the ability to predict or forecast the impact of a hazard, including its magnitude, location, and timing. Detectability. The capacity to confirm that the predicted impacts are actually going to occur. Certainty. This is about the level of confidence we have in our predictions and detections. Lead time, the duration between prediction or detection and the actual impact of the hazard. More lead time allows for better preparation and response. Duration of impact, the period between the beginning and the end of the impacts, during which warning information can be disseminated effectively. Scientific dissemination, the use of reliable networks and institutions to share scientific information about the hazard. Moving to the social and institutional factors. Local dissemination, ensuring that warning messages are effectively communicated at the local level. Access and receivability and understanding, making sure that communities can receive the warnings and understand the messages clearly. Validation of the warning, confirming that the warnings are accurate and reliable. Trust and faith in the early warning system, building and maintaining trust in the system among communities and stakeholders. Taking appropriate action/response, encouraging timely and appropriate responses to warnings. Warning for people with special needs and diversity, ensuring that warnings are inclusive, catering to people with special needs and diverse groups. Feedback, collecting feedback to assess the impacts and effectiveness of the warnings. Ownership of the early warning system, promoting a sense of ownership among local communities and stakeholders to sustain the system. Here, we illustrate the comprehensive process of a multi-hazard early warning system, highlighting the critical steps involved from monitoring to community response. First, under the monitoring and warning phase, indicated in blue. Observation and monitoring, the process begins with the continuous observation and monitoring of potential hazards. Data analysis, collected data is then analyzed to identify patterns, trends, and early signals of potential hazards. Prediction, based on the analyzed data, predictions are made regarding the possible occurrence of the hazard. Risk assessment, alongside prediction, a risk assessment is conducted to evaluate the potential impact on communities and infrastructure. Potential impact assessment, this step integrates both prediction and risk assessment to estimate the potential impact on the affected areas. Next is the dissemination and communication phase, in green. Warning formulation, an appropriate warning is formulated based on the impact assessment, ensuring clarity and accuracy. Preparation of response options, once the warning is formulated, response options are prepared to ensure that at-risk communities are ready to take necessary actions. Dissemination to at-risk communities, the formulated warnings and response options are disseminated to the communities that might be affected, ensuring they receive the information in a timely and understandable manner. Lastly, we move to the community response phase, in black. Community response, at-risk communities take action based on the warnings and response options provided. This response is critical to minimizing the impact of the hazard and ensuring safety. Supporting these phases are two additional elements. Risk knowledge, in red encompassing risk assessment and potential impact assessment to build a comprehensive understanding of risks. Response capability, in purple representing the community's ability to respond effectively based on the information and warnings provided. Implementing a multi-hazard early warning system is not without its challenges. Limited resources and technical capacities can hinder the development and maintenance of these systems. Coordination among multiple stakeholders, such as governments, communities, and international organizations, can also be complex. Furthermore, reaching marginalized and vulnerable populations, ensuring data accuracy, and overcoming communication barriers remain significant challenges. To enhance multi-hazard early warning systems, several strategies can be employed. Building local capacities through training and fostering partnerships is essential. Integrating new technologies and data sources can help improve prediction accuracy and speed. Strengthening public awareness and education campaigns can ensure that communities are prepared and know how to act when a warning is issued. These strategies create a more resilient and responsive system. In conclusion, a multi-hazard early warning system's effectiveness relies on four key components: risk knowledge, monitoring and warning services, dissemination and communication, and response capability. An integrated, community-centered approach is critical to ensure these systems work effectively. Moving forward, we encourage you to engage in workshops, training sessions, and collaborative efforts to strengthen these systems in your communities. With that, we have finished the module. Please move on to the quiz section when you are ready to complete Module 1. Thank you very much for your attention.